Is it possible for someone to completely disappear off the face of the earth, leaving no clue to their fate, or go missing for days, unable to remember what has happened to them, or worse still, meet their death in bizarre circumstances with no plausible explanation? Well, in this video, we'll look at 10 cases where that is exactly what happened, when the individuals involved ventured into national parks and never returned. Mirroring what David Paulides believes, these cases and hundreds like them are unusual and mysterious, and with the lack of any other explanation, is there something about national parks and other forested areas around the world that pose an unknown but sinister danger to us all? Now, before we begin, if you'd like us to go in depth on any one of these individuals, then head over to Patreon at the end of the video to take part in our poll. The case with the highest number of votes will be turned into an in-depth podcast episode over on the Hit the Lights podcast. As always, if you haven't already done so, hit those lights, sit back, and enjoy. Stacey Arras. On July 25th, 1981, 14-year-old Stacey Arras from Saratoga went on a horse riding trip with her father George and 7 others in the Sunrise Meadows area of Yosemite National Park in California. After riding for a few hours, the group stopped at Sunrise High Sierra Camp, where they intended to stay the night. After freshening up, Stacey told her dad she was going for a walk to stretch her legs and take pictures of the views. She asked him if he wanted to come, but he told her he'd pass, although he did advise her to change her flip-flops to more suitable walking footwear. Stacey was seen walking towards a boulder where an older member of the group, Gerald Stewart, was sitting. She told Gerald she was going to take a walk to a nearby lake. Gerald offered to walk with her, but after a short time he felt tired and sat down to rest, while Stacey carried on alone. This was the last time she was ever seen. When Stacey didn't return, it was Gerald who raised the alarm, and a search party was sent out. However, despite a vast search and rescue operation, the only thing ever found was the lens cap from Stacey's camera. There were no indications of an animal attack or a scuffle of any kind, and no sign has ever been found of Stacey's camera or her clothing. She simply vanished off the face of the earth. The missing days of Danny Filippidis. On February 2nd, 2018, firefighter Danny Filippidis, who was on a ski trip with friends at the Whiteface Mountain Ski Resort, briefly parted from the group to retrieve his cell phone from his car, but he never returned. His disappearance sparked a massive search. 6 days later, Danny turned up in Sacramento, still dressed in his ski gear, with no ID except a single credit card. He had no idea how he ended up there, but believes he may have flagged down a truck, and the next thing he remembered was the truck driver telling him he was in Utah, nearly 2,000 miles away from Whiteface Mountain. Danny eventually got a phone, but took a day to remember his wife's phone number to call for help. Once Danny returned home safely, questions and speculation swirled around his cross-country journey. The supposed truck driver who transported him to Sacramento seemed to be the only one who could solve the mystery. However, authorities could not identify the driver, and despite publicity, he has never come forward. It's believed Danny suffered a head injury at some point, resulting in a concussion and memory loss. However, there are those that believe that Danny was abducted by aliens and returned after they had carried out experiments, or that some other sinister force was to blame. The truth is, we may never know. It is unlikely Danny will ever remember what happened, and with no sign of the truck driver, the disappearance and what happened during those lost 6 days is a complete mystery. Timothy Barnes. On July 5th, 1988, 24-year-old Timothy Barnes from Cucamonga, California, intended to hike from Murphy Creek Tailhead to Polydome Lakes in Yosemite National Park. He left Tenia Lakes near Highway 120 at approximately 9 a.m. and was expected to return by 4:30 p.m. When he didn't show up the following morning, one of his friends reported him to Park Service rangers as missing. An extensive search of the surrounding area failed to yield any evidence of Timothy's whereabouts, and he has never been seen or heard from since. On July 19, 1990, 2 years after his disappearance, Timothy was declared legally dead. But do people just vanish without a trace, or do they want to? DeOrr Kunz. 2-year-old DeOrr Kunz Jr. from Idaho Falls disappeared on July 10, 2015, while visiting Timber Creek Campground in Idaho, with his parents Jessica Mitchell and Vernal DeOrr Kunz, along with other friends and family members. DeOrr's parents went fishing with a friend and thought their son was being watched by his great-grandfather, Robert Walton. He in turn claimed he thought his parents were watching the toddler. When they realized DeOrr was missing, a search was launched, but no trace of the boy was found. After the police interviewed Vernal and Jessica and gathered evidence, they became suspects. There were discrepancies in their accounts, and they both failed multiple polygraph tests. However, they were never arrested or charged. From the beginning, the parents claimed that they did not know what happened to their son, and that as they walked towards the creek to fish, the boy followed them, but then decided to return to be with his great-grandfather. That was the last anybody saw of him. Multiple massive searches have been conducted through the mountain meadows, dense pine forests and waterways in the weeks and months since DeOrr disappeared, but no solid evidence of his whereabouts has ever been found. But a few things do not add up. The boy was said to be wearing cowboy boots, a size too big for his feet, which allegedly kept slipping off, and many speculated that if he was attacked by an animal or snatched, the boots would have fallen off, but no trace of the boots has ever turned up. Both the parents publicly admitted to the media that either of them was capable of harming their son. Since DeOrr's disappearance, they have since split up and moved on with their lives. But there is a lot more to this story, with far more questions and answers. If you'd like us to go more in depth on this topic, then head on over to the Patreon poll and select The Disappearance of DeOrr Kunz. James Pruitt. On February 28, 2019, 70-year-old James Pruitt parked his car at the Glacier Gorge parking lot at Rocky Mountain National Park and set out for a day of hiking. On March 3rd, park rangers contacted James's family in Tennessee as his car was parked in the lot with no overnight permit. His family confirmed he was in the area, but they hadn't heard from him since February 28th. They were unaware of his destination for that day, but said James had no intention of staying overnight in the park. The National Park Service initiated extensive search efforts in the area that were hindered by heavy snowfall, but could not locate James. Search efforts continued throughout the year. The overall search area encompassed approximately 15 square miles and included the Glacier Gorge drainage, the Lockvale drainage and the Glacier Creek drainage, but nothing was ever turned up. No clues, no remains, nothing. James Pruitt is still a missing person, and to date, investigations continue. But similar to most of these cases, there is no explanation, no closure, and no indication as to where James is now. What happened to Dr. James McGrogan? 39-year-old Dr. James McGrogan was visiting Vail in March 2014, a small town at the base of Vail Mountain and the center of the vast ski resort set within the White River National Forest in Colorado. At around 8:30 a.m. on the morning of March 14th, Jim, as he was known, and 3 companions left on the 9-mile hike to the Eisman Hut. At the time, there was a lot of snow in the area that was several feet deep in some parts. However, Jim and his friends were experienced hikers, well prepared for the elements. At about 10 a.m., with about 5 miles to go, the group stopped to rest. But Jim was keen to hike on ahead of the party, and they expected to catch up with him along the way. But he was never seen alive again. By 5:30 p.m., the others had notified authorities that Jim was missing, and a rescue operation was launched. A 5-day search failed to find any signs of him. Jim's cell phone pinged once the day he went missing, but after that it went dead. 20 days later, a group of backcountry skiers found a body about 4.5 miles from the Booth Falls area. It was identified as Jim. He was found still wearing his helmet, but had no coat or gloves on, and strangely no boots. He was still in possession of his cell phone in an area where there would have been signal, and his snowboard was found nearby. His boots have never been located, and the coroner confirmed that James died of multiple injuries, including head trauma and a broken femur, and his death was ruled an accident. But as with all these cases, there are a lot of unanswered questions as to the circumstances that led James so far off course. Why didn't he use his cell phone to call for help, or his GPS tracker, both of which we can assume were fully functional at the time of his disappearance? Why did he leave on his own? And where are his boots? It's been suggested he succumbed to hypothermia and began to paradoxically undress. It's a possibility, but why he didn't call for help is a mystery and has caused many to believe another force was to blame. Linda Arteaga. On September 22, 2012, 53-year-old Linda Arteaga was hiking with her brother Eddie in the forests of the Arkansas Ozarks near the town of St. Joe. Eddie returned alone after becoming separated from his sister, and when she didn't make it out of the woods, a large-scale search was launched. Miraculously, Linda was found 5 days later in a distressed state. However, when Linda was questioned about how she ended up alone in the woods, she couldn't remember a thing. In her mind, her brother was hurt, and she had tried to find help for him. As she walked through the woods, she spotted other hikers and tried to communicate with them, but they ignored her as if she wasn't there. She also said she could see other shadowy figures hiding from her in the woods, saying they were weird people, very weird people. One of the rescue workers who found Linda believed she wasn't of sound mind when he found her, and it's since been speculated that whilst trying to survive alone for 5 days, Linda may have ingested some hallucinogenic berries. Although there was no real evidence of this, and to this day it remains unclear what really happened to Linda, and who the strange people she referred to actually were. Morgan Heimer. 22-year-old Morgan Heimer was working as a guide for the rafting company Tour West. The group were on day 6 of an 8-day trip on the Colorado River when Heimer went missing. He was last seen on Tuesday, June 2, 2015, at approximately 4 p.m. around River Mile 213 near Pumpkin Springs in the Grand Canyon National Park. Before his disappearance, Morgan had told the lead guide he was taking some time off that afternoon, but when he didn't return for dinner, he was reported missing. At first, searchers weren't overly concerned, as Morgan had the skills and ability to survive, even if he had gotten lost, and they thought there was a high likelihood he would be found alive and well. But after 6 days of extensive searches of both the rivers and land, there was no sign of Morgan, and no evidence of him has ever been found. This is yet another baffling vanishing in a national park with no plausible explanation, other than possibly something sinister was responsible. Derek Lueking. 24-year-old Derek Lueking worked as an orderly at a Pennsylvania behavioral health center in Tennessee. But when he didn't turn up for work on March 15, 2015, alarm bells rang. Attempts to contact him via his cell phone failed, and eventually it was his roommate Ryan who confirmed he was missing. Ryan contacted Derek's family, but they had no idea where he was and rushed from their home in Virginia to Tennessee to help look for him. After looking through Derek's computer, they found a search for the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and a reservation for a hotel. The family went out looking in the area and by luck found Derek's car, a white Ford Escape, in the parking lot of Newfound Gap on the Tennessee-North Carolina line. Inside the car were several items of newly purchased survival gear worth around $1,000. There were also pages from a military survival manual, a wallet and some cash. Derek had obviously been preparing for a trip into the wilderness. He was known to be a big fan of Bear Grylls, and this led people to believe he may have been trying to emulate his hero by going off into the wilderness without his survival gear. However, they also found a disturbing note that read, "Don't try to follow me." In another twist, on March 17th, surveillance video showed Derek leaving the Microtel Inn and Suites in Cherokee near the national park. On the bed of his hotel room was a Bible, and on the floor was a liquor bottle. The video footage would be the last ever sighting of Derek, An extensive search was launched, and rangers interviewed other hikers who were in the park at the time, but strangely, no one could remember seeing Derek. Derek's father, Tim, said he had noticed a change in his son prior to his disappearance. He had started drinking a bit and smoking. However, friends didn't believe he was depressed or had any suicidal tendencies, although he was unhappy with his job. Since 2012, no sign of Derek has ever been found, and he is still listed as missing. The Great Smoky Mountain Park Service are still searching for Derek, and his family continue to raise awareness in the hope that one day there will be an explanation for his vanishing. The question is, did he walk away from life? Was he injured? Or is there some other outcome? The strange case of Stephen Kubacki. In 2018, 23-year-old Stephen Kubacki was a student at Hope College, a small private Christian university near the southeastern shore of Lake Michigan. In February of that year, Stephen went on a solo cross-country skiing trip for a day or two. This was common for Stephen, as he was an experienced cross-country skier. However, this time he didn't return. When a search was launched, a 200-yard trail of footprints in the snow were discovered that led past the edge of a lake before ending abruptly, leading investigators to conclude that Stephen drowned somewhere under a thick layer of unbroken ice. Stephen's skis and backpack were also found abandoned. An extensive air and land search was undertaken, but no sign of Stephen was found. Over a year after the disappearance, on May 5th, 1979, Stephen Kubacki woke up on a grassy knoll in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, 700 miles from where he had vanished. He had no memory of the previous 14.5 months, and only realized how much time had passed once he bought a newspaper and saw the date. He managed to make his way to an aunt's house in Great Barrington, and from there he was reunited with his shocked family. Stephen later told how he remembered right up until the time he disappeared, when he got lost and felt cold. After that, he had no clue what happened to him, although the backpack he had with him indicated he had travelled widely, but he didn't recognise any of his clothing or the glasses he was wearing. Today, Kubacki works as a psychologist and is alive and well in the Pacific Northwest. He rarely talks about his missing 14 months, but theorists have suggested that Stephen's disappearance was close to the southeastern boundary of the so-called Lake Michigan Triangle, an area where numerous unexplained air disasters, shipwrecks, and vanishings have occurred, where some believe aliens or some other supernatural forces are responsible. What do you think? So that's it for this video. Some of these cases are incredibly interesting, and again, head on over to Patreon to take part in the poll on which individual you'd like to learn more about. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next video.